Hi everyone, Steve Flanders here to talk to you today about Login Site APIs. First, a little bit about me. I am in the CMBU, or Cloud Management Business Unit at VMware, working on the Login Site product. I serve as the Login Site CTO and subject matter expert. If you're interested in learning more about Login Site, I'd encourage you to take a look at my blog or follow me on Twitter. I cover it extensively. So today I want to talk to you about APIs, specifically for Login Site. Now, there's actually a variety of different types of APIs in Login Site. Let's touch on each of them. First, we have the ingestion API, how you get data into a Login Site instance. We've actually had this since Login Site 2.0, and it's leveraged extensively by our Login Site agent that's available for both Windows and Linux. Now, of course, you can call this ingestion API yourself. It is publicly available. There's documentation for this. It's fully supported, and I put a link here if you're interested. Now, we have an authentication API that was introduced in Login Site 3.3. This allows you to authenticate with Login Site, and then you could issue other API requests. As it turns out, for ingestion, you do not need to authenticate. Think about syslog. If you were to send a syslog message to a Login Site instance, you don't need to authenticate. So the authentication API is really for other types of API calls you're going to make. For example, if you want to issue a query, think about if you go in the UI of Login Site, you need to authenticate first before you can issue that query. Well, same applies with the API. If you want to issue a query, you authenticate first. Both of these APIs were introduced in Login Site 3.3. In the case of the query API, we did actually enhance it in Login Site 3.6, which is the latest generally available version of Login Site. However, if you caught the VMware management blog this morning, Login Site 4.0 was announced. It hasn't been released yet, but it has been announced. I encourage you to go take a look at that blog post. It tells you all about the new features that are coming. Now, in the case of these authentication and query APIs, we do have documentation for them. That link here is posted for you. It'll take you to GitHub, and we can dynamically update that for you on the fly. Now, there are other APIs as well. We actually have a variety of configuration APIs, how you actually make changes to a Login Site virtual appliance or the configuration of your Login Site instance itself. These were experimental, or called tech preview, in Login Site 3.6. Experimental basically means it's not supported and there's no official documentation. However, I do have some documentation for you and some ways you can leverage this today. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So first, some API basics specific to Login Site. First, these are RESTful APIs, kind of what you'd expect. Second, JSON based, and I specifically put the header here, so content type of application JSON. This is important. If you try to send another content type, you could run into some errors, so just keep that in mind. Authentication is based on a session ID. We actually use the authorization bearer header. I'll show examples of this in a second. And then you have your session ID, which is unique for you. It does have a TTL, and it will expire. And then I'd encourage you to check the response headers. So the response headers will actually tell you some pretty interesting information. One of those key pieces of information is this LI API status. We actually mark our APIs if they are deprecated or if they are tech preview. So if you're making a call, you'll know if that API is supported. If it's deprecated, that means it's going to go away. We will support it for 2 GA releases, but you should be looking at the new API that was released, and you should be considered moving to it, because eventually we will fully remove support for that API. In the case of tech preview, that just means it's experimental. There's no support, there's no documentation. It may change in another version, it may be pulled from another version, but you can start leveraging it today if you're interested in it. Now, I do have a couple blog posts. First, the blog post I have is back from July. It is available right now on my blog. However, I'm going to say it's deprecated. If you go look at it, it doesn't say deprecated yet. Tomorrow it will. I have a new blog post coming out tomorrow. And in that blog post, I'm actually going to link to a GitHub link that gives you bash functions to actually call the LI API. It also provides some amount of documentation for you so you can learn how to use some of these experimental configuration APIs. And then expect more announcements around this soon. In fact, for the Login Site 4.0 on the blog post on the VMware Management blog, you'll see that we announced the install APIs, or deployment APIs. Those are coming soon. They're available as a tech preview now. We're going to have full support for them coming up here shortly. All right, so let's walk through some examples. This might be a little bit small, but hopefully you can see it. First, there's this thing called LI API. Just to touch on that briefly, if you haven't seen my blog post, this is the bash function I'm talking about. It actually calls the API for you. It takes a few inputs, and it goes ahead and calls the API on your behalf. So here we see I'm calling an IP address, could be an FQDN. In this case, I'm issuing a post request, could be a GET request. I have the URL I want to go to, and then the body of the message that I'm sending. In this case, I'm actually calling the ingestion API. And when I call the ingestion API, you'll see that, in this case, I'm getting the header information. In the ingestion API here, I don't see anything about a deprecated API. That means it's supported. You can see the message itself got ingested and that it's okay. If I do something like a get to the version would be a configuration API. Notice how it says that this is a tech preview API and it may change in a future release. Again, we want to be as transparent as possible. We don't want you to have to go read the documentation to figure out how these APIs work, so we try to provide all the information using a RESTful method for you automatically. What else do we have here? Well, some of these configuration APIs, they require authentication first. So you saw previously I was able to get the version information without authenticating. But if I want to do something like list the licenses, I have to be authenticated to do that first. And the bash functions that I'm going to provide for you, they make sure that you're authenticated. You'll see here, you need to run li auth first. So I can go ahead and run li auth. Supports local and Active Directory accounts today. We have the tech preview support for VIDM, that could be used as well. You go ahead and provide your credentials, and what you end up doing is getting an environmental variable called li session ID. This session ID gets passed with all of your li API requests. So now that I have this session ID, I can go ahead and issue the same request to licensing, and what do you know, I actually get the results. Again, it's a tech preview API, I get the output. Sorry, I'm not going to show you my license key, so I muted that out. But besides that, you can see all the different role-based access control capabilities and all the functionality that you get from this API as well. What else can you do? Well, I mean, if you looked at the previous format, it was kind of hard to read, so I have a little wrapper in here. You can pass a pretty command line parameter, and I'll go ahead and wrap that for you as well. So you can see the JSON in a more human-readable format instead of machine parsable. And if you don't do the pretty format, then it is machine parsable, because all you have to do is basically tail minus n this last message, and you don't get the header information. If you're interested in command line parameters to remove the header, let me know. Issue a pull request to the GitHub repository. It can be updated as well. Now, there's a bunch of different APIs. Not all of them are fully documented given that they're tech preview. I've listed a bunch of them for you. So there's a ton of get APIs available. I now have post methods. So my initial blog post back in July, it only had get, now we have post. Things like the deployment support bundle, ingesting of getting the log bundle, a bunch of different parameters that you might find useful for deploying, configuring, and managing a log inside instance. If you're interested in other ones, let me know. We can extend this as well. So let's actually walk through how this works for, say, the deployment API. So if you deploy a new instance of Log Insight, a virtual appliance, and you go to the IP address or FQDN of that in a web browser, you'll be presented with the welcome to Log Insight. Now you could go through the GUI, next, and get it configured. However, if you want to programmatically do this, say you're deploying forwarders in each one of your data center, you don't want to do that manually, it's as simple as calling the deployment new. I'm going to say I want to deploy a new instance. I'm going to provide the admin information. That's the requirement. You have to have an admin password, and if you want an email address. And then Log Insight goes ahead and configures that for you. Once I've actually run this simple API request, if I then refresh the page, I'll immediately get the login screen. So I can have the configuration happen simple and easily, reduces the number of clicks. Mind you, there's only like 3 in the UI already. But if I want to do this programmatically, I can. So again, the API is really going to make your life a whole lot easier when you're running and managing a Log Insight instance. We're looking to support all of those APIs here in the long term. You're going to see more and more released with every single release. And of course, we're interested in getting your feedback. So I'd encourage you to take a look at loginsight.vmware.com if you haven't already. It's an online community that you can sign up for. You can actually vote for new features. You can submit questions. You can submit community content packs, variety of information there. You can go ahead and hit up VM Log Insight on Twitter. Also very active if you have questions or quick little tidbits. And of course, be sure to take a look at vRealize Log Insight. If you own vSphere, you get 25 OSI of Log Insight for free. If you own NSX, you get a one-to-one mapping of licensing. So most people that are using VMware today have some amount of Log Insight licenses already. Definitely worth taking a look at it. I also have on my blog post, sflanders.net/log-insight. A lot of rich information about Log Insight, not just from me, but from the community as well. I'm looking for anyone that's doing blog posts or Twitter or YouTube or what have you, trying to provide a central repository for you, so please take a look at that. Thank you so much.